Hello, everyone, and good morning to this our presentation of the results of the 19th quarterly survey undertaken by the Centre for Cross-Border Cooperation on the conditions for North-South and East-West cooperation. You're very welcome, and I'm joined this morning by our regular collaborator and commentator on the survey, Dr. Ben Rosher, Centre for Cross-Border Cooperation Research Associate, and now at the University of Gothenburg. So if you bear with me a sec, and I will share my screen. So I'll give a brief introduction, as usual, to the survey and the context as to why we do this survey. And then I'll hand over to Ben, who's done the analysis of the results, and he'll take us through that analysis, and then we'll have a quick discussion at the end. This survey was undertaken to cover the period between July and September 2025. And the reason we do this is that the survey is really a vital means and a vital tool for the centre to give us an understanding of the extent to which the necessary conditions for North-South cooperation are being maintained, and how relations between civic society organisations and local authorities on the island of Ireland and Great Britain are being safeguarded following the Brexit transition period and the implementation of the protocol, or the Windsor Framework as it's known now. The survey is aimed specifically at civic society organisations and local authorities. And the reason for that is that during the mapping exercise that was undertaken on North-South cooperation in 2017 by the UK and the EU, they did sort of admit that they may have overlooked some of the cooperation that they are involved in. And a sort of technical note, explanatory note that was issued after that mapping exercise stated that further areas of informal, local and community level cooperation may not have been captured by that exercise. So we wanted to make sure that the levels of cooperation between civic society organisations and local authorities at grassroots level and the issues impacting them were captured and understood. And that's why the survey has been aimed at this cohort of organisations and people. At this point, I suppose we always, give out a sort of heartfelt thanks to the people who undertake the survey and who faithfully complete it. We're on the 19th iteration at this stage, and we're very grateful to our respondents, all those people who've taken the time, especially those who've responded in previous quarters. And Ben will talk us through in a bit more detail during his part of the presentation on who is the sort of level of repeat responders. But I suppose, as well as offering that thanks, we also want to, I suppose, we need to put out the plea that we need your ongoing help in responding to future surveys so that we can raise the issues that are important to you. And as we always say at this point, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And the outworkings of Brexit, the protocol, the Windsor Framework are, ongoing and will continue to impact on cooperation North-South and East-West across these islands for years to come. So we need to keep monitoring the conditions and what's happening, particularly at grassroots level. In terms of what we do with the information we get from the survey, as well as publicising it through this briefing and through this presentation, and through the briefing paper that Ben produces as a result of his analysis, the information that's coming out of that process, we use that in the centre as we work with other organisations to protect North-South and East-West relations and cooperation, not least through the ad hoc group for North-South and East-West cooperation, which the centre convenes. So we raise issues arising from the survey in various fora and with various decision makers that we're meeting with to discuss cross-border and East-West cooperation. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Ben, and Ben will take us through the data take us through his analysis of the findings, and then we'll have a bit of discussion at the end. So Ben, over to you. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Hello, as always, to those of you who've joined us before, and welcome to anybody who's joining us for the first time. As Aidan says, today I'm going to give a general overview of the results of the 19th quarterly survey on the conditions for North-South and East-West cooperation. A fuller analysis will be made available in the research briefing, which will be out in the next few days on the website. For today, I will give an explanation of the data and break down on the respondents to this survey before heading into the substantive parts of the analysis on the experiences and perceptions of cross-border contacts, cooperation and collaboration, both in the North-South and in the East-West dimensions. Now, in this round of the survey, 97% of respondents have completed at least one previous round of the survey, which is the highest repeat response rate we've had so far. So thank you, everybody, for keep coming back and keep participating in these. It really does make a difference. That the survey has been repeated every quarter since the beginning of 2021, and that we now have a consistently high number of repeat respondents, we are able to infer the shape of some trends regarding the views and experiences of the protocol, the Windsor framework, and the general post-Brexit landscape across these islands with a good degree of clarity. Now, the insights are further developed through the inclusion of qualitative responses to the central contextual questions. And this allows us to provide more nuanced insights into how respondents are experiencing the changing political, social, regulatory and material conditions for North-South and East-West collaboration, as well as their suggestions for ways to improve these environments. And this information has proved invaluable in painting a more detailed picture of the current context for cooperation and collaboration across these islands. As always, it needs to be appreciated that the respondents to this and every round of the survey are expert practitioners in the fields of cross-border cooperation and collaboration. They're civic society organisations, and so have a wealth of insight, experience and expertise in these matters. And so the analysis should be considered with that level of expertise in mind. Now, for this round of the survey, it's been collected during September and gathered 29 responses in total, with, as I say, 97% of respondents reporting that they have completed the survey in at least one previous quarter. For this round, 55% of respondents were based in the Republic of Ireland, 41% in Northern Ireland, and 3% had a presence on both sides of the border, which means we still have a reasonably equal balance across the jurisdictions. Looking to the North-South dimension, first of all, in this quarter, 76% of respondents had had meetings with organisations in the other jurisdiction on the island of Ireland. What has stood out for this survey is that 100% of respondents reported that meetings with organisations in the other jurisdiction discussed challenges to cross-border cooperation on occasion for 55%, or to a significant extent for 46%. And this high level has developed into something of a trend over recent surveys, but it is the first time that every respondent has reported discussing disruption caused by Brexit in their meetings with counterparts in the other jurisdiction. While we obviously welcome that dialogue is open and issues are being discussed, it does remain concerning that so much time and energy is spent trying to resolve issues that primarily arise from Brexit. And the nature of challenges discussed in the previous quarter were varied as ever, but it touched on issues including tax, tourism, and challenges confronting cross-border workers. For example, one respondent has said that jurisdictional differences in taxation, apprenticeship requirements, immigration policies, recognition of professional qualifications undermine the fulfilment of the opportunities presented by an all-Ireland approach to the labour market, and means certain individuals are unable to cross the border in order to participate in cross-border projects. At present, 79% of respondents are involved in cross-border collaborations with a partner in the other jurisdiction. However, this quarter, only 35% of respondents presently engaged in North-South cross-border cooperation reported that they were receiving funding specifically for those projects. And that is, I think, the lowest level we've seen during these surveys, and something that we'll talk about when we come to the end here. Turning to the perceptions of the contextual environments for cooperation and collaboration. First, the political context. 10% believe that it's improved on the previous quarter, while 79% say it stayed more or less the same. And when we've asked respondents to develop on these answers, many have pointed to concerns that the Irish government are neglecting their responsibilities under the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, with one saying that the implementation of the Good Friday Agreement is regressing and there is zero focus by the Republic of Ireland government on both spirit and letter of the GFA. On another matter, another respondent has said that our involvement has been training on attitudes, prejudice and human rights in context of explorations of historical developments and the impact of conflict. Developing this in an environment of suspicion and deep bigotry has been challenging, but in many cases very rewarding. So we've got mixed response in terms of the political dimension, but there are some things we'll need to pick up on later on. Looking to the social context, 66% of respondents say that it's remained the same on the previous quarter, and 21% say it's deteriorated. Several respondents have, again, as we saw last quarter, noticed the racism and violence directed towards migrants in recent months as having implications for social life across these islands. One respondent to this survey has said that the rise of racist sentiment in both jurisdictions is providing a worse social context for North-South cooperation, especially when seeking to address differences in immigration policies that would support greater cross-border mobility. And another has said that while contact and engagement between the two traditional communities has improved somewhat, and especially among the young, suspicion, distrust and wariness remain notable. A recent factor has been the rise of anti-migrant hostility and racist xenophobia, and points towards the lack of education and fragmented training interventions as being factors in failures to address these issues. Looking at the regulatory context, 69% of respondents say that it's remained the same on the previous quarter, and 24% say they're unsure how or if it has changed. And this is due to what respondents have called a increasingly complex regulatory landscape, which is resulting in more disjointed regulation. And another has said that in terms of visas and sharing of data between jurisdictions, it's still very much in the air, which is causing uncertainty in terms of the regulatory context. With regard to the material context for North-South collaboration, 72% of respondents believe it's the same as the previous quarter, and again, 21% are unclear if or how it has changed. One respondent replied that Northern Ireland would seem tethered to a more antiquated system of transport, narrower product range, poor internationalisation and substandard public transport and technology services, and that the gap in comparison with the Republic is very noticeable. Well, another has reported that the Peace Plus funding becoming live again is facilitating more civic society work across the border. Looking now towards the East-West dimension, excuse me, this quarter, 62% of respondents report having meetings with organisations in Great Britain. And again, we're seeing this become more robust over surveys. This, considering the low levels we were at in the early days of these surveys, it has been gradually ticking up. 82% of respondents reported that meetings with partners in Great Britain discussed challenges to cooperation on occasion for 64% and to a significant extent for 18%. And these were focused primarily on the UK's inability to access some EU programmes, with one respondent saying that the unique legal framework requires distinct consideration of policy and legislation. Now, this quarter, 69% of respondents say they are currently involved in collaboration with a Great Britain-based organisation, and 44% of respondents currently engaged in East-West collaborative projects reported their organisation was in receipt of funding for those projects. And I think I'm right in saying this is the first time that the relative level of East-West funding has been higher than that for North-South. And again, this is something we'll come to talk on more towards the end of this report. It's particularly a welcome increase from the 25% reported last quarter. And so we hope this is indicative of a move towards an improved funding landscape for East-West cooperation moving forward. If we turn now to the perceptions of the contextual environment for cooperation and collaboration on the East-West dimension, 66% of respondents believe that the political context for East-West cooperation has remained the same on the previous quarter, with 14% saying it's improved. And when we've asked respondents to expand on this, there's been something of a mixed response with contrasting views on the UK government's engagement with Northern Ireland. And one respondent said that since the Labour Party, there seems to be a greater appetite for collaboration with Ireland among the UK government, On the other hand, another respondent said there doesn't seem to be much appetite for engagement. It lacks the urgency and drive it used to it lacks the urgency and drive it used to have as broader geopolitical events have taken over. Now, with regards to the social context, 66% respondents report that it's remained the same on the previous quarter, with 10% reporting a deterioration and 7% reporting an improvement. And one respondent has said that there appears to be a greater level of cooperation between both executives East-West, and the optics look better politically, which impacts society. However, another has reported that the impact of Brexit is incremental and there is no sense of enthusiasm, and having no involvement in EU programmes gives less reason to reach out. And in terms of the East-West regulatory context, 66% of respondents say that it has stayed the same over the previous quarter, but none have reported an improvement, while 10% say it has deteriorated. So still we're not seeing a great deal of improvement or sense of improvement in the regulatory context. And when considering the material context, 62% of people reported that the material context has remained the same on the previous quarter, with 14% saying that it's deteriorated. And one respondent has said that there are more barriers to online delivery of goods, which is causing issues in the material environment. So just to bring this to a close before we go into a bit of a longer discussion with Aidan, this quarter has seen some much welcome improvement to the East-West dimension. There's been increased levels of contact, increased levels of cooperation, and increased levels of funding between Northern Ireland and Great Britain-based partners. I say the increase in response reporting they're receiving funding for these projects is particularly welcome and something we will monitor going forward to ensure that this stays robust. There are, of course, concerns that remain to be addressed, particularly around cross-border travel for non-UK and Irish frontier workers, and around the engagement of the Irish government with their role in the Good Friday Agreement. And something that appeared in the last quarter survey and again in this quarter survey, and something that really does need to bear repeating, is that there remain clear concerns for the racism and violence which has been directed at migrant communities across the UK and Ireland, and which all governments have a responsibility to address. And with that, I will wrap up for now and pass back to Aidan. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ben, and thanks for taking us through your analysis of the survey and the findings for this quarter. Ben, there's a couple of things when I was reading through your briefing and your analysis, your presentation. A couple of thoughts struck me. Like when the Assembly came back, I think it's roughly 21 months ago, in the results of the next few quarterly surveys, we could see an uptick in the numbers of people who were saying conditions for North-South and East-West cooperation had improved, and that was welcome. But at the same time, the point was made that we needed to see that goodwill at the political, the macro level, then filtering down to address issues, the practical issues that groups are facing on the ground who are involved in cooperation activities. But would it be fair to say that judging from the comments in the survey, the last couple of versions of the survey, we aren't seeing that happen, maybe to the extent that we would have wanted to?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm not sure whether it's a case that maybe we were, not want to be too negative, whether people were sort of hoping for too much to come from the new Assembly and it hasn't quite been realised, or whether things have been generally more negative than we should reasonably have hoped for. I think the positive read on it is that once the Assembly and the Executive came back, we saw an uptick in the sense of improvement, and now we've reached a point of stasis where things are staying largely the same, so we've not seen a deterioration. So I don't think we can read that it's been a complete disappointment, but at the same time, it's possibly not lived up to people's most optimistic expectations, and there are still the politics of Northern Ireland, which will continue to be there. And so I think the Assembly have done a reasonable job given the expectations, the opportunities placed on them, but there is always more that can be done.
In this quarter, and you've referred to it already in your comments, 79% of respondents were involved in cross-border collaboration north-south, but only 35% of these were in receipt of funding for cross-border work. And that represents a continuation of a trend that we were first sort of noticed in the 17th edition of this survey, which was undertaken between January and March 2025. Is there any suggestion then in the qualitative comments as to why, groups maybe expectations of or actual experience of funding to support North-South cooperation maybe has tailed off?
I think it's an interesting one. I think you might be better placed to answer some of the points on this one. In terms of the qualitative responses, there definitely seems to be a coincidence between the drop in funding and people thinking that the Irish government aren't living up to their responsibilities under the Good Friday Agreement. But I'm not sure if you've got some insights into what else may be leaking into that perception.
Well, I mean, the only thing, there's nothing really definite around that, but I think the only thing that we had sort of maybe picked up was, obviously with the new the Trump administration, there's a significant focus obviously across lots of officials and departments and politicians in terms of how the new American administration's approach, particularly since around tariffs and trade, would impact on the Republic of Ireland's economy more generally. And I think a lot of the official bandwidth has been taken up by focusing on those issues, perhaps.
Yeah, that would absolutely make sense.
But on the other hand, I guess one of the other things you pointed out was the positive, the increase in respondents who are accessing funding for East-West cooperation projects, which is like up from 25 to 44% from the last survey. So hopefully that's been an ongoing issue
it's
for a long
we've been banging on about for the last 5 years.
Support. Yeah, basically for the last 5 years.
So
it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see if this is a trend as opposed to just a blip.
Yeah, I think having Peace Plus back up and running, the government seems more engaged than it has in a while in terms of making these dimensions, these relationships work. So hopefully this is, I'm not wanting to put too much weight on it, but hopefully this is the start of a positive shift.
And the final thing I was going to pick up on then that's coming from the survey and has been a theme over the last maybe four versions or the 4 quarters was that despite EU and UK relations obviously have definitely been de-dramatised since the Labour government came in with their reset in UK-EU relations, which has marked a very different approach obviously from the previous government. But at the same time, we've seen the social context for cooperation, although it's like your analysis is showing that it's more steady state that groups are reporting in terms of social context, but we're still seeing in the qualitative comments concerns being expressed around the rise in violence and intimidation directed against migrants across these islands, and that's been highlighted. It's maybe not coming out in the qualitative numbers in terms of how people are viewing the social context, but it's definitely coming out in each version in the qualitative comments.
Yeah, absolutely. And rise in racism and xenophobia partly has roots in Brexit. Obviously, this isn't something we can attribute entirely to Brexit and is part of an unfortunate, regrettable, horrific trend that we're seeing across many parts of Europe and the global north. And so it's not just something that is local to here, but it is happening and so does need to be addressed. And it's also happening in Great Britain, it's happening in Ireland. It is something that needs to be addressed holistically and collectively, but it can't be let to go on as it is.
Absolutely. Well, Ben, I think we will leave it at that for today. And again, just to thank you so much for your analysis and for your commentary and for recording the presentation. And a final thanks as well to all those organisations and individuals who complete the survey. And hopefully we will see again for the 20th version of the quarterly survey. So thank you and goodbye.